We begin with new developments in the sextortion ring that caused the suicide of Marquette teen Jordan DeMay. There's been a major breakthrough in the investigation.
Today, charges were announced against 5 U.S. men. They are accused of receiving nearly $200,000 from victims like DeMay. TV6's Elizabeth Peterson has been following this case for 2.5 years and has the latest.
In just over a month, 2 of the 3 Nigerian men charged in a sextortion scheme that resulted in the death of Jordan DeMay will be sentenced in Marquette's federal court. The 2 brothers, Samuel and Samson Agoshi, pleaded guilty for their role in the scheme where they pretended to be a young woman on social media, encouraging teenage boys and young men to engage in sexually explicit conduct and produce images of that conduct, and then ultimately blackmailing them. Today, we learned more about how the financial piece of this scheme works and those who are allegedly behind it.
These individuals, we allege, facilitated this sextortion scheme by receiving payments from the victims and transferring the money to Nigeria, ultimately to those carrying out the scheme that resulted in the death of Jordan DeMay and victimized many others.
The men charged are all from Georgia and Alabama and in their 30s. Totten wouldn't say how the men in the U.S. met the Agoshis. The 5 face a single count of conspiracy to commit money laundering. Investigators say the men took part in financial transactions they knew were related to a crime. Totten explained evidence today that shows DeMay sent one of the defendants, Jonathan Green, $300 just hours before the teen died by suicide. In total, the 5 men are accused of getting $179,000 from victims, taking a cut of the money, converting it to Bitcoin, and transferring it to a Nigerian co-conspirator only referred to as the plug. The plug then kept a portion of the Bitcoin funds and dispersed what was left. In DeMay's case, that money, $300, was found to go through these transactions, with the remaining Bitcoin being sent to Samuel and Samson Agoshi, brothers who have pleaded guilty to the scheme.
At the end of the day, they each did this for $60, and that really breaks my heart over such a small amount of money.
For DeMay's mother, as this investigation continues, as answers continue to be found, as the circumstances around her son's death continue to be unraveled, it gives her hope for others, that they may not have to go through what her family has.
It's difficult. I mean, the whole situation is difficult. But we have answers that a lot of parents don't get. And you know, in these people being found and the steps that are being taken and these rings being taken down, at the end of the day, it's helpful for me to know that people are being held accountable and they can't do this to someone else.
It's a message and a sentiment Totten agrees with and stands behind as this landmark case moves forward with more than 100 sextortion victims tied to the ring.
If you are in the money laundering business, we will track you down and we will hold you accountable.
The charge of money laundering carries a maximum sentence of 20 years in prison. In the coming weeks, all 5 defendants are expected to face a judge for arraignment in a Grand Rapids federal courtroom. We will continue to follow this case and will be in federal court in September as the Agoshi brothers are sentenced for their role in the sextortion scheme and the death of Jordan DeMay.
We begin with new developments in a monumental extortion ring. The 2 men extradited from Nigeria who've pleaded guilty for their role in the sextortion scheme that led to the death of Marquette teen Jordan DeMay are headed to prison. TV6's Elizabeth Peterson was in Marquette federal court today as both men received their sentences and is here now. Elizabeth.
Ben, today was an emotional day. The courtroom on Washington Street in Marquette was packed with the family and friends of Jordan DeMay and law enforcement from multiple agencies who've worked for over 2.5 years to track and charge those responsible. Because this was a federal court, cameras were not allowed in the courtroom. Facing a maximum of 30 years in prison, Samuel and Samson were both sentenced to 17.5 years in prison today. The judge veering from the maximum sentence because of the cooperation both Samson and Samuel have provided, information that's led to other arrests. Today's sentence rang with a message for justice for Jordan. but also rang loud to victims across the country, a message to predators preying on our most vulnerable that these crimes will not be tolerated.
I think the message was sent to those two young men today, and his family and his friends and all of his co-conspirators back home are watching. They're going to be sharing what's happening today, and I think that's the bigger message.
Today was a lot to take in. In 2.5 years, we've been waiting for someone to be held accountable for what they did to Jordan, and that absolutely happened.
Today was a first in the history of the United States, the first time men from Nigeria were extradited and brought through the legal system. It's monumental, it sets a precedent, and it marks a turning point in how these cases will be handled by law enforcement, investigators, and the Justice Department into the future. Now, there is a third defendant in this case, Ezekiel Robert. His case continues to move through the Nigerian court system. And 5 American men charged with money laundering, taking victims' money and transferring it to a contact in Nigeria have been arrested. I'll have more on the messages from Jordan's family from the courtroom on your TV6 Early News. Ben?
We begin with new developments as 2 men from Nigeria are sentenced to their role in a sextortion scheme that involved more than 100 victims and led to the death of Marquette teen Jordan DeMay.
Now, today's sentencing happened in Marquette Federal Court. Our cameras were not allowed in the courtroom, but TV6's Elizabeth Peterson was there. Elizabeth, this is the culmination of an over 2-year investigation involving multiple agencies across the state, country, and overseas. It's a monumental day happening right here in the Upper Peninsula.
Cody, Grace, everyone I spoke with this afternoon pressed that point, the significance of this moment, a first in the history of the United States. Samuel and Samson Agoshi will spend the next 17.5 years in prison. Through the work of law enforcement, starting with the Marquette County Sheriff's Department to the FBI and countless others behind the scenes, the Agoshis were tracked, charged, and extradited to the United States. They pleaded guilty to posing as young women on social media, persuading teenage boys and young men to send sexually explicit photos, and then blackmailing them with those images. The Agoshis detailed the way they harassed and tortured these victims until they sent money, and in Jordan's case, he sent $300, but from the pressure, ultimately died by suicide. For Jordan's family and friends who filled the courtroom today, it was justice for Jordan. And for those working to protect our most vulnerable online, it was a message: these crimes will not be tolerated. In a packed courtroom inside the Marquette Federal Courthouse, friends and family of Jordan DeMay showed their support as Samuel and Samson Agoshi were sentenced to 17.5 years in prison. Tears flowed as Jordan's parents addressed the Agoshis for the first time since their son Jordan died by suicide in 2022. Speaking first, Jennifer shared her last text from Jordan. "Mother, I love you." A text she thought was enduring, but it was his goodbye. She told Samuel, "It's not fair." John and Jessica DeMay also addressed the defendants, sharing stories of who Jordan was, a boy with a smile that would light up any room. Jessica, shaking, told the court the defendants stole their joy.
Sometimes you have to get into the details to really make sure somebody grasps what happened, what they've done, what our loss was.
Together, they shared the nightmare that was Jordan's last night, his last moments, and they listened as both men apologized. Samuel saying, "I'd like to apologize to the family of Jordan DeMay. I'm sorry from the bottom of my heart." Samson saying, "I'm sorry for what I did. I made a bad decision to make money." Their statements were brief, but the emotions of this day were heavy.
It was difficult, definitely, to hear them apologize, because really, I know that they may be remorseful and thinking that they did make some bad decisions in that evening, but their words don't bring back my son Jordan.
There is no sentence that will bring Jordan back. There is now and always will be a hole felt by those who knew and loved Jordan. But today is action in a fight to protect other kids. It's a day to recognize justice for Jordan and the path forward.
It's a great day for Jordan. It's a great day for our community. Everybody in the world really is seeing that this crime isn't going to be unnoticed. And if you're thinking you're going to hide behind the computer, hide behind an ocean, we're proving that today that that's just not the case.
Both Samuel and Samson will be deported back to Nigeria after their time in prison. The investigation into the sextortion scheme continues. 5 additional men were recently charged for their role, money laundering. All 5 were U.S. citizens. We will continue to follow this case as more details are released.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Now, Taunton and the FBI remind us tonight that there are things you can keep in mind to help protect your families from sextortion schemes. Be selective of what you share online. If your pages are open to everyone, a predator could get more information. Also, be wary of first-time encounters. Block or ignore messages from strangers.
People can pretend to be anything or anyone online. Be suspicious of people you meet who ask you to start talking on a different platform. Be in the know that anything you share online can be made public, and be willing to ask for help. Block suspicious senders and report odd behavior to the site administrator or go to an adult. You can find more tips and helpful contact information on uppermichigansource.com.
In continuing coverage, 2 Nigerian men, Samuel and Samson Agoshi, will spend the next 17.5 years in prison for their role in a sextortion scheme that led to the death of Marquette teen Jordan DeMay. We were there in Marquette Federal Court yesterday as their sentences were handed down.
It was the result of over 2 years of investigation of our local law enforcement doing it right from the beginning. And while this marks a historic moment in the United States, it's only the beginning. As TV6's Elizabeth Peterson reports, the work to protect our most vulnerable is far from over.
I want people to appreciate that this is a very real threat, that what happened to the victim in this case, to Jordan DeMay, unfortunately is not a one-off. It's something we are seeing with increasing with rapid speed.
U.S. Attorney for the Western District of Michigan, Mark Totten, says they have multiple sextortion cases in his district right now. Cases where victims have died by suicide as a result of sextortion. It's a very real threat and one that is aimed at our children. It has no borders and leaves everyone with a cell phone at risk.
I think this case has really been, perhaps more than any other, a wake-up call to America about the scope of this threat and the dangers that our kids face by the devices we put in their pockets.
It's been rare to catch these predators. They've hidden behind a tangled web of jurisdictions, red tape, and changing technology. But tracking, charging, extraditing, and convicting Samuel and Samson Agoshi has set a new precedent. And it's created a blueprint, one the Marquette County Sheriff's Department is sharing across the country.
We are going to take it on the road and let officers know what we did, what they can do, and to help their communities.
It starts with awareness, with implementing protections for our kids. It's teaching families not just what the threat is, but what to do when the threat creeps into our homes.
This is where I feel is my job, is to keep getting the message out to the kids that this may happen to you, and if it does, there's consequences and, embarrassment, but it's not the end of the world, and it's not worth killing yourself. It's a matter of reaching out to a parent, a teacher, a police officer, someone, and, telling them, and then we can get the ball rolling.
It's all the parents of Jordan DeMay can ask for, that the pain of losing their son, the light of their lives, to sextortion can lead to other kids, other families from ever having to be in their place.
With your help, getting our voices and sharing Jordan's story, it is making a difference. And he will never be forgotten. And every day I know his life and story is saving another life.
The investigation into the sextortion scheme that led to the death of Jordan DeMay is not over. A third defendant in Nigeria, Ezekiel Robert, has appealed his extradition to the United States. That process is still unfolding. 5 U.S. citizens have been charged with money laundering in this scheme. 1 has been arraigned and 4 others await their arraignments. We will continue to cover this case and others like it.